If there's a mountain range in Middle-earth that really sucks, it's the Misty Mountains. Tall, foreboding peaks raised by Morgoth himself, if you look at the map of Middle-earth, they're in such an inconvenient position. But the Misty Mountains are more than just an inconvenience, they're a major problem. At least as far back as the Second Age, the Misty Mountains have been home to orcs, lots of them, and these orcs caused many a problem, especially throughout the Third Age. Yet for all their activity during the Third Age, the orcs of the Misty Mountains were surprisingly quiet during the War of the Ring. Why? Why did Sauron not call upon them to aid his attacks in the north? So let's pose another question to get the answer. How powerful were the orcs of the Misty Mountains during the War of the Ring? To get the answer, you need to look at the history of the orcs of the Misty Mountains. They've lived there since at least the Second Age in places like Gundabad or Goblin Town, and have been constantly fighting the dwarves. Following Sauron's defeat, they're somewhat dormant, but as Sauron's influence begins to return, the orcs of the Misty Mountains become more active, especially following the fall of Khazad-dûm to the Balrog in 1981 of the Third Age. By the end of the Watchful Peace in 2460 of the Third Age, the Misty Mountains are crawling with orcs from Moria to Gundabad. This starts what could be called a 300-year golden age for the orcs of the Misty Mountains, and spurred on by Sauron, they become a major threat to Middle-earth. They build fortresses and block the major passes through the mountains. In 2509, they capture Celebrian, wife of Elrond and daughter of Galadriel and Celeborn. In 2510, they help the Easterlings assault Gondor's army at the Battle of the Fields of Celebrant. In 2740, they begin invading Eriador, even making it as far as the Shire in 2747. So if the orcs of the Misty Mountains are such a huge problem, how come they went pretty much unused during the War of the Ring? What happened to them? A simple answer: annihilation. And a little of something else, but I'll get to that after. In 2790 of the Third Age, the orcs pushed their luck too far. They murdered Thror, king of Durin's folk, which led to the War of the Dwarves and Orcs. By 2799, the orcs are almost entirely wiped out. Some do manage to survive, some even by fleeing to the White Mountains, where they would plague Rohan until the reign of King Folker between 2851 and 2864. The orcs of the Misty Mountains spend the next century recovering, and make no mistake, the Misty Mountains were still a dangerous place. In 2933, Arathorn, Aragorn's father, is killed whilst hunting orcs, and in the famous quest for Erebor, Thorin's company is taken prisoner by the Great Goblin in Goblin Town. This leads to a second major disaster for the orcs of the Misty Mountains. Seeking vengeance for the death of his father Azog and the death of the Great Goblin, Bolg leads an orc army from Gundabad to Erebor, but suffers a crushing defeat in the Battle of the Five Armies. In The Hobbit, it's said that 3 parts of the Goblin warriors of the North perished on that day. That's a big deal. To add some further detail on how diminished the orcs were, following the Battle of the Five Armies, Beorn and later Grimbeorn and the Beornings would keep the High Pass and the Fort of Carrock open to travellers. The High Pass was a lot safer in these times than it had been for at least 1,000 years. And we should mention Balin's colony. Although a failure in the end, they did manage to hold Moria for 5 years before finally being destroyed. That's despite being completely isolated and probably only numbering a few hundred dwarves at most. Even during the War of the Ring, there's evidence to suggest that the orcs still haven't really covered that well at all. When faced with the prospect of entering Moria, Gandalf tells the Fellowship that the orcs of the Misty Mountains are diminished, and that although the Eagles have spotted orcs gathering in some numbers, he would not lead the Fellowship through Moria unless there was a chance they could make it through. And sure enough, the Fellowship are in Moria for almost 2 days before they are found. In the Chamber of Maz-Zabul, the Fellowship slays only 13 orcs before the orcs retreat, and although that doesn't really speak for how many there were, it might indicate that they don't number in the thousands like the films might depict. We know, at least, that when the Fellowship escapes Moria, the number of pursuing orcs only numbered around 100, as spoken by Haldir to Frodo. This only really refers to the orcs in Moria, but there is only small amounts of evidence to suggest that the orcs of Gundabad and Goblin Town were active as well. Corroborating with the Eagle's earlier observations, Frodo sees the Misty Mountains whilst atop Amon Hen, the Hill of Sight, and it's described as orcs pouring out like ants on an anthill. It's a vague description, but it gives the impression that there are a lot of them. But how much is a lot? Thousands? Tens of thousands? Especially from the perspective of a hobbit. Frodo does see the lands and the Vales of Anduin burning, suggesting that these orcs were active, but it's also very possible that the Vales of Anduin were burning due to orcs from Dol Guldur. Either way, whilst there is evidence that the orcs of the Misty Mountains may have formed raiding parties to attack Eriador or the Vales of Anduin, we don't have any information that implies that they formed large armies to attack with. Earlier I mentioned a little of something else, which also helps answer the question, and this something else is Isengard and Mordor. Now, Saruman only reveals his army at Isengard once he betrays Gandalf, but the fact that he had possibly been crossing men and orcs to create Uruk-hai implies that these efforts had been going on for much longer. So where did Saruman's orcs come from? Well, they came from the Misty Mountains, and they presumably came in their thousands. And at the same time, Sauron had also been recruiting orcs from the Misty Mountains, and there's a good chance that many of these orcs actually ended up in Dol Guldur. The orcs led by Grishnak that join Ugluk's company in Rohan as they take Merry and Pippin to Isengard are actually also orcs from the Misty Mountains. I don't want to give the impression that the orcs of the Misty Mountains acted as mercenaries, because they didn't really. Orcs are submissive when it comes to powerful Dark Lords or their servants, but it's clear that many of them stopped acting independently and instead joined either Sauron or Saruman, possibly because they lacked the ability to wage warfare on their own. So now we have the information at hand. The orcs of the Misty Mountains suffered catastrophic defeats towards the end of the Third Age, and barely participated in the War of the Ring, and many of their warriors ended up joining Saruman or Sauron. So let's answer the question. How powerful were the orcs of the Misty Mountains during the War of the Ring? Well, not very powerful at all. After all, their apparent absence in the war probably wasn't that big a deal to Sauron. I know people like numbers, and although I'm not incredibly comfortable giving numbers with so little to work with, I shall do so nonetheless. And remember, these numbers are non-canon, merely my estimate. If I had to guess, I would give my absolute maximum at 20,000 Orcish warriors from the Gap of Rohan to Gundabad, this number not including those orcs that served with Saruman or Sauron. That's 20,000 warriors scattered across almost 1,500 kilometers or 900 miles of mountains, both above and below ground. And although I give 20,000 as a maximum, I would certainly not be against suggesting that number could be as low as 10,000, or possibly even 5,000. A regional threat at the very most, without the capability to assemble large armies to fight powerful foes. That was the strength of the orcs of the Misty Mountains during the War of the Ring. So, now I pose the question to you. Do you agree? After all, none of my estimates are set in stone, this one least of all. Do you think they are stronger, or perhaps they are weaker? Let me know what you think in the comments. As always, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, or at least found it interesting. I apologize for the hiatus, but I feel like it was kind of coming. I didn't really want to get burnt out on making these videos, because I do enjoy making them. For those asking, a video on how strong Isengard was will be coming in the future, as will one on Dale. They're both in the list of planned videos, which is a very long list I might add, so it might be a while yet. Cheers until next time, and remember, don't piss off dwarves because they will respond with attempted genocide.